Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Microwave Extravaganza podcast, the only podcast proud to be sponsored by Dolezal Nails, Tanning, and Hair. Because who would know better? Extravaganza podcast, the only podcast proud to be sponsored by Dolezal. Oh, that's the that. Whoops! I forgot that I had that playing in the back. Whoops.
It's all right.
All right. We're also sponsored to you by PETA's new organic line of dog food. Remember, if you want to make sure that dogs never die and don't get their body is reused, PETA has been killing dogs for years and has recycled all their bones, flesh, and eyeballs to put it into your new dog food. They have the solution. It's called a shotgun to the overpopulation problem because they love animals. PETA, because fuck it. And finally, by Dole of Fruit Interventions. Remember, if you want to make sure that some country yields to your opinions, just get Dole on your in your lobbying department, and they'll make sure to intervene in any country that said we don't feel like getting involved. They know how to make politicians say yes. Dole Fruit United, because fuck you, we want money. Anyway,
Dole.
I think the best way I can introduce you is having you introduce yourself. So that
hello, audience, Mr. Z here.
Monsieur Z, as it says on your Twitter.
Monsieur Z, yes, Moncho Z, however people like to pronounce it. Mr. Z.
So give people a little bit of a background. Like, you tend to do stuff that's, from the videos I've seen, very similar to Cody from Alt History Hub.
Yes, I'm an alternate historian. I take specific moments from history that could have drastically altered our history, twist it around, discuss the history behind whatever war, period, or event it might be, and then craft a story from that. I really love it. It's a lot of fun.
I know. It is fun. The thing is, I'm so busy responding to SJWs, and I haven't told a whole lot of people this, but part of the reason why a lot of series that I start, I get like 75% of the way through, then I don't always finish, even though is because I've had a lot of problems with depression, and it's only starting to get a little bit better now. So now I'm actually having an easier time getting everything back on schedule, and I actually plan to have an entire week where instead of making a new series, I'll end up like going on to any of my old series and trying to finish those up, to give those sweet views and clicks for all the things I said I would do that I didn't quite finish. So I do apologize for all those who are listening.
Oh, how many views do you usually get?
Not nearly as many as I used to, like 13, 14, 15 nowadays. But one of my most popular videos got 2,500 views.
Well, I'm gonna post this around, see if I can get it some more views. Try to stimulate it a little bit.
Oh, sweetheart. So now you're not a fascist yourself, but you have definitely done a lot of videos of what it would be like if fascism had actually occurred in a lot of countries. And you said, I think in your description, that you do try to represent the ideology of fascism well, and I'm guessing that's because fascism has gone from reality to essentially a name to call people, and it hasn't been quite represented fairly, right?
Yeah, it's basically a very slanderous thing right now. And communism is pretty much the same, though the communists wear it a lot more. You could say they wear it better, but yeah, they're wearing it proud. They're not wearing it well, is what I'll say.
Yeah, they're like that. They're like that guy who like pours on Axe body spray, and no matter how much the women tell him how disgusting he smells, he just walks around being like, "Oh, come on, why are you sucking my dick right now?"
That's funny.
Oh, I used to be one of those dumbasses too, because my parents divorced when I was young, and I spent a lot of time with my mom. And it's not that I don't love my mom. In fact, I want to say this right now. It's not because all single mothers are mean people. It's that you just can't replace a dad. You can do your best, but a dad or a father figure is still a father figure, you know.
So I'm guessing you were kind of balancing for a father figure, for like some kind of masculine thing you're trying to compensate for a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I did that for a long time, and I think I'm white knuckled. I'll say this: my journey to becoming more masculine has been a positive one. I've definitely changed into a much more masculine man that understands masculinity much better. But the process was, like falling and down the stairs, except going up instead of down.
The gym's always a good place to start, man. It's always a good place to start.
So what?
The gym is always a good place to start.
Oh, hell yeah. First off, let's be honest. Part of the reason why I think women have a harder time emotionally dealing with things is because they're not built with testosterone now. It's not saying if you inject testosterone into a woman that'll be healthy. We're different, and those differences are important. But women, but like testosterone is really good for chilling you out. It helps with dopamine, and I think that really helps you get a perspective on things. And also, you need to have goals and the ability to stick to them to go anywhere.
Right. Imagine if you're in nature and you're a man in nature. Do you think it'd be advantageous for testosterone to make you complain about things and always worry about things? Probably not.
Yeah. Oh my God, an ant! He wanted to steal and eat my children.
uh,
Uh, now, so we were talking a few before we began about. By the way, in case anyone didn't get that Dolezal joke, Rachel Dolezal hair and nails. You know, the catchphrase should have been so good even the NAACP agrees. You remember that story?
crickets. No, I don't remember that story.
Oh, there was a woman called Rachel Dolezal. Plenty of people in the political sphere and history sphere will remember. She was the woman who actually was the leader of the NAACP in Spokane, Washington, I believe it was. That might be the wrong city and state, but and she was found out to have always been white and just got a perm and a permatan and a weave.
Oh.
And by the way, she was there for like, I don't know, it was like 5 years or something like that. Everyone believes she was genuinely black until like some photo circled of her where she was like blonde, like she was almost ginger if it wasn't for the fact that her hair wasn't red. It was like so pale. It was so funny. It was so unbelievably funny. That everyone started making fun of her for it. Yeah, but all right. So we were talking about the genetic. By the way, I know you're in the history sphere, but history and politics tend to overlap a lot, don't they?
Yeah, they most certainly do. A lot of historians try to be apolitical or
Yeah.
be safe political, which is just liberal. Uh,
Like, don't worry, guys. Don't worry, guys. Don't worry, overlords at YouTube. I happen to have the correct, approved by the Ministry of Truth opinion.
yeah, my deal is I'm political. I'm not gonna heavily inject my politics into videos, but occasionally I will make a video every now and then where I, do talk about it.
Yeah. So you're political minded, but you know how to kind of keep it in control.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I think anyone who thinks that politics is stupid should realize that, well, there are some people who are not very heavy into politics, but if you've ever thought about how should society be run, you're thinking about politics.
Yeah, that's really one of the big things with alternate history. You cannot be an alternate historian or have an interest in it and not be political because you're by default theorizing about how this world should be. You're thinking about the various ideologies involved. You're thinking about the various factions involved. You really, if you're good at that, you can't not be political.
Yeah, I'm sure Cody from Alt History Hub really has to keep his politics like strapped to right close to the vest, despite having to make, I'd say, pretty good videos. Although I don't like the new guy, from Knowledge Hub. I don't like the new guy that they put in. I like Cody a lot better, not just because of his voice.
The new guy, the one with the goatee.
I don't know I don't know. I've never seen their faces. All I know is he has a slightly higher inclination in his voice.
think that might be Cody's brother. You know, people think I'm Cody's brother because of the way I speak. They say, Mr. Z, are you secretly Alternate History Hub's alt-right channel?
You caught me. I'm all the opinions Cody actually has and more. He just can't say it on his channel.
That's me.
Yes. I can just imagine now Cody having like a channel, that nobody knew was his, and it was just nothing but like race war now, race war.
It's Cody's voice, it's Cody's face, but nobody knows it's him.
Yeah, yeah. Or he just hires someone else to do it all for him.
This has been Cody from Alternate History Hub.
I still like him. But wait, we were talking about we both understand that there is clear data that shows that people of different races do have a tendency of having different IQs, and would you mind explaining what you were saying at first so we can get some context for everybody?
In reference to differences between races?
Yeah.
Well, simply put, scientifically, it exists. To simply disavow differences between races would also be to toss evolution out the door. You can't say, people will acknowledge, okay, evolution exists. That's pretty solid. But people say, oh, it's just a theory. Well, gravity is also a theory. We're pretty solid with evolution being a facet of why we exist the way we do. People will acknowledge that you can breed better and stronger animals or worse animals. There's eugenics and there's dysgenics. Eugenics being creating better organisms, dysgenics creating worse organisms.
Which is really creepy because when you think about the eugenics movements, they use that term very specifically. Like most people associate eugenics as genocide, and that's because they don't know what the original term is. But it is kind of genocide, the movement's goal at least. Which it's kind of like how Black Lives Matter, always is really more of like white people suck. But
right. I myself am not familiar with specifically eugenics movements, but I'm somebody who believes that we as humans ought to strive to become better and healthier. And if there's a lot of fear abound, and it seems that we're afraid to allow ourselves to naturally become better, rather we prefer for genetic engineering to allow us to all equally become better because we're afraid of one group towering above the other through some kind of genetic abnormality or something.
I think it's more like we don't want to make someone so powerful that they can lord over others.
Right, but my big fear with genetic engineering is that it's taking our evolution, it's taking our very nature out of our hands and putting that into science that is fairly new. Of course, we're going to say, well, we're going to test it for X amount of years, but nature has proven that it's pretty good at making living things. We are just a product of nature. If I was good at building robots and my robot built a robot, I don't trust my robot to make a robot better than I could because I built it and I know, hey, I didn't make you to make more robots.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. Plus, we're a growing organism, and nature, the way it did it, was just by nature is literally trial and error because as something continues to grow, whatever nature is, it's essentially just natural events occurring, and our bodies having to over thousands and thousands of years of this monkey died, that monkey lived. Oh, now that monkey's 5 children died. Now a new genetic, but except for there's a 6th monkey that lived. Oh, that monkey was a retard, so he died. It's just nonstop.
It's really whoever can survive will be the one to make more copies of itself. That's just science.
Times all of what reality could throw at it.
And that's how we got where we are today. But
yes.
So I applied that simple principle that we know is real. That over time, people in different environments develop features that make them better suited to those environments. We became racially distinct thousands of years ago. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact amount of years, but it was some thousands of years ago. And it's strange to say that in those thousands of years, white people developed white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, and various other types of mutations because whites are very diverse. Asians developed to be as diverse as they are, because something people often forget is that Hispanics and natives are Asiatic, that they went over from the land bridge, and they correlate with that in genetics tests.
Oh, I'm sure in genetics tests we'd probably test a little bit different from what we were, and from Asians too now, because over many years of living in the same climate, eventually your genetics will change.
Right. But the general gist of it is, how is it that we can account for all these external changes, but we won't find any changes in the way the brain functions? If you think about,
Especially since the brain is very plastic, and that's how we've been able to survive from having much more plasticity and power versus a lot of other animals.
and another major thing is, you think about the genetics of a human and a chimpanzee being, oh well, it's 2% of a difference. Well, in that 2% encompasses all that a person is different from a chimpanzee. So that's pretty distinct. And the brain is, like you said, it's a very plastic, it's a very flexible thing, and it has to adapt to whatever environment it is. If you live in Africa and you're being chased by wild animals on the regular, your brain needs to be able to react to those types of things.
I'm sorry, man. I guess. Hey, can I get a? I'm doing something right here. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, family. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
So, and no matter in what environment you are, your brain also has to adapt to whatever that environment is. People whose brains aren't suited to those environments aren't going to survive. And of course, that creates people with different brain or thought predispositions. And people say, well, it doesn't apply internally. There's no evidence of that. But there is, simply because you need to give different races different types of medicine, or else this medicine, redheads is a perfect example. Redheads, this mere difference in hair color means that you need a lot more anesthesia than somebody who doesn't have your hair color. That's a pretty big thing.
Well, and plus they don't have souls, so
Pretty big distinction there.
South Park reference, by the way, just in case anyone's wondering. That was a joke. That was from South Park. I'm not serious at all. But yeah, I didn't actually know that redheads had to have that. I wonder if that's because of. Actually, I really wouldn't know. I would have to talk to an actual psychologist about that. But also, one thing is also for sure. There's another problem with a lot of different races. There's that old phrase, geography equals destiny. You've heard of that, I'm sure, right?
Geography?
Yeah, geography equals destiny.
Yeah, what your environment will determine how you will evolve.
Yeah. So when you really look at it, a lot of the most civilized cultures in the world also had massive transportation abilities. And part of the reason why is because of what isolation can do to the brain, and what having a variation of different groups of people with various different needs can do to the demands of your genetics. Like, for instance, like when you really think about it, the glory of Europe really has been the countries that have been able to go the farthest distances. Rome, with all of its roads and its many passages, as well as the Library of Alexandria. Britain, with its huge navy, practically ruling the world. And a lot of what Britain did is they didn't invent a whole lot independently, at least that we see today. But they found all sorts of different groups of people that had some intelligent way of doing something. And they copied it and decided to transport all over the world. And it's kind of the amalgamation of different wisdoms from all around the world that really advanced somebody. I think there was a book called I forgot what it was called. Wait, hold on. Something like forget it. It was a book about economics and how economics affects brain chemistry, and how different markets and different needs affect your ability to develop tools and advance society.
Well, yes. If you have an evolutionary need, then I'm sorry. If you have a need as an organism, and you evolutionarily do not have a means to acquire that need, then you simply won't. But anybody else who does have the evolutionary ability to do that will be able to continually have this resource that you don't have and prosper in that field, thus making it so the people in the society who have the ability to acquire that resource that you can't get are going to continue producing more people who can. And you, because your offspring won't be able to do that, will be less successful than those, unless you have an advantage that they don't have.
And sharing these needs, as well as interacting with different groups of people, oftentimes accelerates the rate at which a civilization grows. At least I think that's what I've seen. At least.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that one more time? Your voice is breaking up.
I'm sorry about that. The larger variety of needs that a group has, like I can go over to this country, that country, like 5 different countries, of which are not mine, and because they have different needs economically, socially, if I want to sell to them or trade with them or even interact with them, it's going to advance my culture because I'm going to have so many of those needs needed to be required rather than just 1 or 2. And that's going to require a much higher, more advanced society, much higher IQ, and it's going to teach me advantages and problem solving that I could not think of on my own.
Right, but I think that's more of a modern interpretation of it, looking at it from an economic standpoint. I prefer to look at it from a more primitive evolutionary standpoint of this land is like my niche. This is where my people are. These are the resources we need to harvest, and we're good at harvesting them. We specialize in that. And I feel that that is the best way for any one group of people to really thrive. When you introduce international commerce and such, it opens the door for a lot of it opens the door for those specializations to get money, because when you open the door for trade, you also open the door for inviting people who are good at producing that, so you don't have to do that trade. You can produce that resource there if you import these people who know how to do it. And that just causes that tailspins into a bunch of other issues, but we can discuss those as we go on and talk more about fascism, Volkism, ethno-nationalism, whatever subjects it is we're going to cover in today's video.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So, well, I think that has a lot to do also with the idea of boundaries versus interaction. So, and what I mean by that is, I think there's a large difference between interacting with a new group versus having no borders. So, a good example would be, I'm sure there are plenty of times throughout history that the Mediterranean groups have interacted with each other, both even when like Islam and Wahhabism took over a lot of North Africa. Even Christians in Italy and France probably interacted with Muslims on a regular basis and saw advantages in interacting with them. But because they had a distinct cutoff and they had the ability to push them away or ignore them, that's kind of what protected them. Because I do kind of get what you're saying. If you have everything so mixed, all cultures, all economies, languages, genetics, eventually it turns into what, like that South Park episode, you know, the one where like these people are coming from the future and they all speak like one mix of every language and stuff.
Oh wait, yeah, I think I remember that.
But
they
I
had
mean,
like gray or orange skin, if I remember.
no, it was like orange. Yeah, it was orange. Orange man bad.
Right, but you bring up the Mediterranean, and I think if you want to look at the ancient cultures of the Mediterranean, it'd be interesting to note that all those empires and the gross majority of those people are sort of gone. The ancient Romans are sort of sparsely separated and broken up. The ancient Greeks, the Phoenicians in Carthage, you don't really find that. You find a mix of people who might share the genetics of those people, but there's not many ancient Romans and ancient Greeks and Phoenicians left, if any. The Berbers too, who are like the Berbers, who were a mix of those people, as well as the ancient the people who lived in Egypt before the Arabs. They were a big mix of these things, and the Berbers too are sort of like a diminishing group on the world scene.
So when you say that, because I know that Rome doesn't exist, When you say ancient Romans and Greeks, do you mean like
Their descendants, as their descendants exist, but not in pure stock. The culture and the people who were the ancient Romans are gone.
so basically it's kind of they're more like the campfire story versus the real thing.
Well, I wouldn't say they're a campfire. No, no, no.
That's a little extreme. A little extreme. I'm sorry.
Wait, what?
No, I was saying. I guess that's a little bit of a extreme example. I didn't. I guess it's a little too much. Not a campfire story, but they are. But they really are kind of. Are you saying like a shell? Wait, that sounds insulting. I don't want to.
I no. I would say the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, and the Phoenicians are just like the Native Americans. Do some of them still exist? Yes. Do their genetics still exist in descendants? Yes. But the culture that they created and their people are mostly gone.
And I'm guessing what you mean too is there's also a lot of mixing with other Europeans, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so like the French, the Nordic people, they kind of are all mixed with everyone else in Europe.
Yes.
Yeah. and so now you're like, and so now like someone growing up in Germany is part Irish and part and probably even a little Polish at this point. They're not Aryan anymore.
Yes, that's the general sense of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the only way people like Richard Spencer could be around, though, and wanting a full-on ethno-state of pure white people. Because if you try to say something like that back in the days of, like, King Louis or something like that, King Louis the 13th or something like that, the closest you could get to that would be an only French state. And then it'd be like, oh, you mean France? Because there wasn't... And by the way, I don't know whether you agree with the ethno state or not, but one big disagreement I have is that kind of almost ignores all the very real differences between co-European cultures and how they regularly fight with each other.
Well, what do you mean by co-European cultures?
I mean, like I'm saying like France and Italy and Spain are not the same. They might be more similar now because let's be
absolutely. Honest. I'm saying the Roman culture as is, and I'm not saying Romans as all Europeans. I'm saying Romans. I'm saying Greeks.
Right.
I'm saying that these are distinct ethnic groups with very distinct cultures. I feel that culture is something which is very precious. It's very civilizations that have very beautiful and very successful cultures ought to be preserved. I don't feel that they are something that should simply be muddied away and left to be nothing more than a memory. It should be something that continues producing this great thing that it does.
Yeah. Well, when we were talking about all this, I wasn't quite referring to what you were saying. I was more or less going on tangents. Richard Spencer and a lot of people in the alt-right who want an ethno-state, which I've always kind of felt was a little bit ignorant of history.
Well, I suppose it depends what the ethno-state itself is, because France should exist for French people, and right. and Italy should exist for Italians. The matter of an ethno-state doesn't. I suppose there's application for it in Europe simply because of the big immigration issue going on right now, but they essentially have or had historically a France for French people and a Germany for German people. Here in the U.S., the idea of an ethno-state works along racial lines much better than it does along national lines, because we're,
pan-European.
Yeah, an example is here in the U.S., blacks. Blacks aren't, from Tanzania or from I don't know, and they're black. Blacks here in America are black because their slave ancestry doesn't allow them to know exactly where they came from. They didn't retain that. So the blacks are black in their eyes. That's what it is. Here in America, whites are it's a pan-European thing. The blacks here are pan-African. That's sort of where an ethno-state kind of idea could work, but it would have to be along racial lines rather than national lines as in Europe, because the European cultures are broken up into ethnicities, whereas here in the U.S. we're broader.
Yeah. Plus, could we really justify it all that much, considering that while there are definitely a lot of illegal immigrants here, and my personal thought is that if your parents were if you were born here but your parents were illegal, I don't think that should count. I think the only way birthright citizenship should occur is if your parents were legally in the country when it happened, and they were like at least residents, if not citizens. But I think at this point it would be very hard to establish a ethno-state in the United States, just due to the fact that there are a good amount of minorities here who have been here for like 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, along with the whites, who at that point probably have just as much of a right to the land as anybody else, versus if they were just recent immigrants over here who just came, you know.
The issue doesn't come in the issue isn't necessarily how long they've been here, because I take issue with European immigrants who come here and stay only the nation they come from, because that they don't, and they choose not to become American.
Oh yeah, that's annoying.
But
I would say that if you don't have words,
the issue becomes even worse when an ethnic group that has never been in the Americas before. For instance, the U.S. has been composed of Europeans, blacks, and Native Americans. But when you introduce new ethnic groups to that mix, it adds more conflict to the overall group.
yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of believe in the idea of if you were going to move to any country, I don't care, like even if you're like German and you want to move to I don't know, Holland. Actually, it's the Netherlands. God, what do they even call themselves?
The Netherlands are Dutch. They're swamp Germans
Swamp Germans?
because it's lowlands.
Oh, okay. But you know what I mean. They're their own country separate from Germany, but they are a Germanic people.
Yeah.
You should still say, well, if I'm going to be a citizen here, my loyalty to Germany has to go behind me, behind the new state I live in, as well
Yeah,
as the culture. You
right.
know? So I'm sure if you said, okay, every so many years, so many immigrants are going to come in, they're a relatively small amount. That's different from like what we're experiencing now. Almost all across the world, there's always some country that's advanced where tons of other people are coming into illegally, where it's huge numbers of unregulatable people, most of whom say, if you look at California, there's tons of parades where people are acting like they're in Mexico, where they hold up the Mexican flag, and there's no loyalty to the United States.
In their eyes, they are. Many Mexicans feel that that land belongs to them. It is just part of Mexico. It is occupied by the U.S. That's all it is.
Yeah. And that's that. But what I meant when I said generations, what I meant is at some point, if like you're fifth generation in the United States, unless of course you completely reject your belief that the United States is a valid country, which, believe it or not, a lot of, I'm sure for the audience that's listening right now, you might be surprised to know that there are a lot of African people who don't believe that at all. I think that if you've lived here all your life and you don't really consider yourself anything but American, like if you're like so many generations up, then I think you should have the right to the land, because then not only did you grow up under American institutions, but you really do not have a loyalty to anywhere else. It's far different from, I think, somebody who was born in Mexico, or even if their parents were born in Mexico and they were born in the U.S., but they never speak English in the house, and they're pro open borders and stuff like that. And I think there's a big difference between those two.
Well, let me put it this way: the United. I don't. Once again, I don't believe it's a matter of how long a person has been here. I think it's a matter of how American they are. People often forget in all of America's immigration that the United States does have an identity, and that identity is constantly muddied by more and more immigration, be it from a third world country or be it directly from Europe, and those Europeans not integrating to America. What the situation is, in my eyes, is that America has a culture, and a true American is somebody who is willing to invest himself in that culture and is willing to contribute his labor to that nation.
Well,
now, what we have instead of that is people coming from all over the world, and instead of becoming American and embracing American culture, they bring their nation over here, retain it, and continually expand it to the point where America is breaking up into smaller and smaller nations that belong to that are basically enclaves of other nations.
Well, you see that a lot with the Chinese versus other Asian groups. Because the Chinese, when they came over here, were kind of considered a big problem since they weren't like the Japanese that were all spread out. They were very, very, very holding on to their culture for dear life without even caring. That's why Chinatown and a whole bunch of other pockets of their own independence enclaves were there.
What state are you from?
Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin. Wisconsin has immigration from a lot of immigration from Somalia, if I recall.
That's the most foreign you can get, but we're heavily Germanic.
Ah, well, I'm from New York. New York, or Brooklyn specifically, I could say, is basically a whole bunch of tiny enclave neighborhoods.
Yeah,
I've drawn pictures for my friends of where the Chinese folk live, where the Japanese folk live, where the Mexicans live, the Dominicans, the Puerto Ricans, and the blacks. And the Jews, and the Russians, and the Italians. It's all broken up into little neighborhoods, man.
Well, Jews and Russians, depending on where you are and how much they don't like.
Well, Orthodox Jews specifically. Orthodox Jews specifically have their own little neighborhoods.
Orthodox Jews, I think, have a much more hands-off approach versus secular Jews when you look at their view of how the world should be. They can only be their own thing.
I would disagree. I would feel that I feel that's you were saying Orthodox Jews more so or less so?
Well, I meant like religious Jews tend to and Orthodox tend to be more like we're our own thing. We want to be left alone.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry. I misheard you. I agree. I feel that that's more so the case.
I'm thinking like ethnic Jews that are like that are not religious and secular instead tend to have a very globalist view of the world.
Right, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say whether it be through something more socialistic or something more capitalistic. It seems both of those ideologies, in the eyes of many secular Jews, tend to be internationalist and globalist.
If they're not apolitical, of course, or have very milquetoast view, like when I say milquetoast views, that would be like Dave Rubin, where you probably wouldn't even know he's Jewish until he told you, and you're like, oh yeah, Rubin, oh duh. Like if you can order it at a deli, and it's the last name, you could probably figure it out. Yeah. I like Dave Rubin. What do you think of him?
I don't watch his show too much. I don't watch too many online podcasts. I've seen some episodes of his show, some episodes of Joe Rogan, and some episodes of Stefan Molyneux. But I used to watch a little bit of Andy Worski's show, but not too much else.
Andy kind of is a little obnoxious at times, I have to admit. Like,
well, he can be, but he's got his style about things.
Yeah, whenever I watch a show, and I don't watch it often, I really have to hold on to every word, otherwise I get lost like that, because it's usually some weird internet drama, and I'm just after a while I'm just like, okay, I don't care. Like if you get too far,
I'm not invested enough in this conversation to force myself to listen to it.
Yeah, it's almost like watching a cosmic horror movie, except the cosmic horror is what the hell's going on. It has tentacles and it looks like Cthulhu, and they're talking about Ian Miles Chong, and some person said something racist to somebody else. I don't know anymore. I'm confused. But that's in some ways, some people come on specifically because of that. Just watching some people yell and call each other names. They're right. But back to what we were talking about. And we were talking about what's up?
We were talking about the United States, and we're talking about American identity. America has an identity. I feel that anybody who decides to come here, shed their old skin, as it were, adopt American culture, and dedicate themselves to working for America is an American. I don't feel like somebody whose family has been here 3 generations still speaks the language of wherever they came from, and
Oh, I
doesn't
don't
see
believe
themselves
that.
as a real American has any more right to the land than somebody who comes here and actually loves this country.
Oh yeah. Well, what was I going to say? Did you ever see that? Well, and would you say that is kind of a counter to racial I belief? You know, would you agree that that you can be as white as snow, but if you don't want to be American, you really shouldn't be treated like one, and that you could have dark like African skin, but if you've come here through the right channels and you believe in preserving what America is, that's more legit.
No, I think it's a bit of both, really. I feel like Europeans who come here and don't want to become American don't have a place here. Likewise, I feel that um, there's a difference between Black American culture and White American culture. The two are different things. There's
I meant
it's
like if you're a recent immigrant from like I don't know like Egypt or something, and you want to and you study the language and you try to speak it the best you can, and you don't really care to have loyalty to Egypt anymore.
my issue with that is that Egypt doesn't have any stake in America. Europe, Africa, and
No, I mean an Egyptian person coming to the U.S. to try to become a citizen.
I
And
know that's what I'm saying. Europe,
oh,
Egypt doesn't have a historical stake in America.
so an individual can't choose to um try. I'm confused. I'm a little confused. I'm going to be completely honest with you.
Well, I'm saying that is okay. So let's say a hypothetical
Yeah.
new influx of immigration comes from the Middle East. Well, we do have that sort of going on. So we have an influx of immigration coming from the Middle East. And some of these people coming from the Middle East, because of course this is a hypothetical immigration situation. We're not getting 100% people who want to be Americans. We're getting a mix of some, but mostly
Oh,
people who are bringing their own culture over.
oh.
In this situation, we have a vast Middle Eastern culture growing in the United States, which is foreign, which doesn't have ties to Black American culture or White American culture, and therefore is foreign. It's going to be its own separate thing. The
Oh,
Middle Easterns who like America and who want to invest into creating their America are going to be creating a different version of the United States than the versions White Americans and Black Americans have in mind, the ones that we have known historically. And that's sort of the gist of it. Further it could further divide
oh.
the nation, and it's just an issue that we don't want to. It's a Pandora's box we don't want to open.
Well, that depends. I mean, how separated they are from their own group. If these people isolate themselves, but they try to create what they think America is, well, that's a lot different than if, say, one of these people were to go into a new place where there were no other Egyptians, and they just kind of, you know, just learn the
They
ropes.
quietly integrate into the group, as it were.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right.
I
That
think you're
that
saying,
sort of thing can happen, but the issue is it doesn't happen that way. Immigration from different nations comes in it
wait.
comes in big waves. Yes.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is like even if like I
Even
don't
if
know.
there's even if there's say 1,000 Egyptians in Egypt who would make great Americans, we cannot make an exception for them because that would just open the door for a bunch of other immigration from Egypt, which might not be what we need. We know historically that we can get immigrants from Europe and send back the ones who don't fit in, and we know historically that the black population here in the U.S. has decided to stay here instead of choose to move to Liberia as we have done. We
But
tried
they
to do
oftentimes
historically.
separate themselves, don't they? They oftentimes separate themselves from a larger cultures and have a very antagonistic view of whites.
Well, yes, that's the whole thing. In the past, it used to be that the blacks had their neighborhoods and the whites had their neighborhoods, and the conflict would happen when the two would overlap. Now it's because we've sort of lost the freedom of association. Blacks and whites, conflict will, of course, erupt between the two.
Well, what do you mean by freedom of association? Do you mean on an individual level, or do you mean where even if I don't, even like let's say that I was white, I guess I could probably pass for white if you saw me. I don't have a camera right now though. But and I wanted to hang around with the black people. Would that be free association? Or are you talking like collective free association?
Um, hmm,
I'm sorry, this is just a distinction I think that needs to be made.
right. I suppose freedom of association is on the individual scale as well. Is simply this. Darn it! What's the dang word? It escapes me. It's discouraged. There we go.
Oh.
If at least for whites, because every now and then you see articles of how they have the black only spaces or they have the Hispanic only spaces. Whereas if you have a neighborhood that is not even entirely white, but 90% white,
Yeah.
you get the idea, oh, these must be a bunch of white supremacists hanging out in their own little enclave. But it's just the way people like to be in an environment where they feel they're one with the people around them. And it's harder to do that when you have people who just physically look very different from you.
Yeah. Unless, of course, you have a common reason why they're there, and you don't, and you've grown up a certain way. I would say that I grew up. I grew up around all Europeans, but I was not born in Wisconsin. I was born in Colombia.
Mhm.
But I get along with them fine. And I think you can both agree on this, though. I hate to throw a black pill in there, but when you say America does have a culture, well, we mostly used to. We still have something. Although, let's be honest, we don't have much of a culture anymore. It's not gone, but it's kind of on life supports, and I hope it doesn't die.
I feel the American culture still exists and is still very much revivable. It's
Oh yeah, it's not
if you here's the funny thing. There are people who still practice Roman tradition. There's a whole movement to keep Roman tradition alive, but
in Rome, in Rome.
I'm not sure exactly, but I know the thing exists. It's actually it's a whole official movement. They still wear traditional Roman clothing. It's very strange. Now, this is just anybody who wants to preserve the Roman culture, of course. It's not actually it's not actually practiced by Romans, as it were.
Ethnic Italy. I was supposed to say ethnic Jews. Oh my god.
But the whole deal is if you can attempt to preserve that culture or revive that culture, even if it's been dead for a very long time, I feel that the American culture, especially with the vast majority of its old practicers and their descendants still being here, is completely salvageable.
Yeah. Well, never said it wasn't salvageable. What I'm saying is I think we can both agree we haven't really adopted too much of another culture compared to like other countries. Like it's a good example. Britain is pretty much screwed.
I would say much of the West has watered down their cultures.
Yeah, I would, but I mean Britain especially, like mosques everywhere. Like even in the U.S., it's not as bad. But I think we all have I think we can agree we have kind of started to become.
I would say it depends what state you are in. I would say New York City is pretty far gone. California's cities are pretty far gone.
Yeah.
It really depends what state you're in.
Well, you're on the ground there. You can see it going down as it goes down. You're like, this is Mr. Z reporting to you live from ghettos of I don't know, Chinatown.
The ghettos of Chinatown. Did you know in Chinatown most of the doors are unlocked? You can just access the roofs really easy.
Well, that's probably because they trust each other.
No, the doors are unlocked because the locks are broken.
I just thought it was because they're Asians. They had that really strict culture, like you either that or you lawyer. Although
no, Chinatown is not the wealthiest neighborhood, at least not the parts I've walked through. But
well,
the doors you can they sort of just swing open if you push them.
You just Oh my! Hey, maybe that's how they practice ninja stuff. Okay, that's a little racist, but it's still funny. And plus, that's Japan. Is there like a smaller Japanese neighborhood, or is it?
Yes, there are. There's some smaller Japanese communities, and they're actually pretty neat. They're pretty neat, but they're not American.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that you look at it, I understand, but I think we can both agree that depending on where you are, there's some places that aren't even necessarily multicultural that don't really seem American because they're more just corporates. And I don't mean like capitalist, because there's plenty of civilizations that had like tons of markets.
Oh, you mean like the gray buildings with that have no inspiration to them? You mean like just that gray slab environment?
It looks like what hell would be if it was a business.
Well,
Like,
you're not wrong there.
like we know, like small little markets. I'm not talking like that. I'm not talking about regular capitalists. I'm talking like the full on. There's 5 corporations and they all have the same color scheme and everything looks just.
And they're all owned by the same parent company.
Yeah, and they own 5 other smaller companies that pretend to be different.
And they all compete against each other, but are really.
Yeah, it's basically Fight Club. Oh, that's a good movie, by the way. That's a great movie.
That movie made me who I am as a man. It's a great movie.
I know, right? Actually, I think we should also talk about masculinity, but I hate to cut it short. I don't have all the time in the world because I do have to get going at like 4:30.
Mm.
So normally I would have it be like 2 or 3 hours, but is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine with me. If you want, we could do a part 2. We could, because we didn't exactly get to the main part of the video, which was explaining fascism.
Yeah.
This was really more the woes of the modern world and
Yeah.
how nationalism and ethno-nationalism could apply to them.
Yeah, and plus, I want to say this: have you heard of Lauren Southern?
Lauren, yeah, I'm familiar with her.
Yeah, so she one time said something that really annoyed me. She said the words like, this is a different subject, by the way. All politics are identity politics. I do want to get your feelings on that, but I don't really believe that because when you think about it, it seems like politics is really just it's just it's just the philosophy or system of how power should be distributed. That really seems to be about it. You know, we take away all the new age woo woo talk.
As somebody who likes to look at things from like how this would apply to animals and nature, I'd say in a sense, yes, all politics are identity politics. But it's really a question of what identity you're referring to, because you could just break it down to the capitalists, the communists, the whites, the blacks, this country, that country. All politics could be broken down to identity politics. My country versus your country, my economic system versus your economic system.
Yeah. Well, I do think that there are some times where you could just say it's universally you could you could universally say that no matter what situation you're in, communism never works. That's kind of a universal, but in your own head, if you're a communist, yes, communism works. But hi, I'm reality. I hope you enjoy this day.
In my mind, I believed it to be true.
Yes. Hey, if I just autistically scream loud enough, Donald Trump will stop being president. Do you remember that picture? That one woman with that fat girl with the black hat on and the Coke bottle glasses who was on her knees. And then,
I remember that. That person, I couldn't tell if they were a boy or a girl.
I'm guessing girl, just really ugly girl based on the voice. Yeah, but okay. So let's try to go into something I think that could be constructive, just so that we would get to before we have to end it. Just because of a timing thing. When it comes to really getting a lot of America back on track, first off, I think we should define what America's values are. And I'm going to say this right now. Like when I mentioned that black pill earlier, it's because, and this is probably due to the brainwashing that happens throughout our lives as millennials, when it comes to television and a lot of controlled legacy media and movies and stuff like that. But I had the hardest time ever defining American values. And I definitely came up with, we're definitely an individualist country. We're definitely we're definitely I like to say the word pioneer in that we like to take risks and go out and try new things and explore known territory. Oh, and there's a huge thing of family values. So
I'll agree with those 3 things, but the first issue is individualism. Now, yes, we're very individualist, but at the very same time, this is a big core factor of my ideology, where you can be both an individualist and you can be part of a greater collective, and people seem to forget that. People believe that only one of the two can exist, but our founders knew that while individual freedom is important, the freedom of each person for the freedoms of each state, we are still one country. We are still one people. We must be united in that sense. And people forget that. Because our identity has been broken up, because we have so many different identities in America now competing for dominance, we have lost that unity. And now all we have is the individuality, which causes us to spiral into destroying ourselves, really.
Yeah. I will say that we should have maybe more of an individualist approach beyond, despite a few what I would call monolithic identities. So I think as an American, I consider myself an American before I consider myself genetically a Latin, and I consider myself an American before I consider myself. Well, actually, I don't think that my Christian identity as a Catholic competes with my Americanism. So I think they're basically the same. Not identical, but they are not in competition. But I consider those to be my identities before anything else. I can say I'm a nerd, but that doesn't mean I'm a nerd who now belongs to the Vulcan Empire. So I think
I suppose historically, because you brought up Catholicism, historically an issue with Catholicism in the U.S. is because America's identity was Protestant. And there was a lot of antagonism toward the Catholics because the Catholics had a loyalty to the Roman Catholic Church, which was an American institution. It was outside of the country. That's why there was a lot of concern about the Italians and the Irish.
Yeah, but I think now we've kind of found a way of not needing to have those two be in competition anymore.
Well, I suppose I attribute that really to the diminishing role of religion in our society. We're becoming more secular, but we need something to replace that, because I feel that a secular society is a more intelligent society, but it is a weaker society, and it is a less motivated society. Well, there will always be people who need a dogma to guide them and something to inspire them and something to tell them why they need to be a certain way.
Well, I think that you have to understand the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Being one that, you said a more intelligent society. Well, I think they can see things without attaching emotion to it. But wisdom is kind of the understanding of what to do with the knowledge you have. And, I think that I put Catholicism in my guidance of what kind of person should I be? But when it comes to science and stuff like that, that's kind of what is reality.
No, I think that's very good. I think that's precisely what I am getting at. I feel that religion is important for guiding people. It's almost a necessary facet in being a productive human.
Yeah, but I do believe in the mystical side with the God and everything. But I believe that God is, that's the reason why, even though we were Protestant, we also said that the church and the state are separate. But go ahead.
Right, but what I'm saying is, and I don't mean to offend you because I see you yourself are religious, but religion at itself can sometimes be at odds with certain discoveries.
Oh yeah,
evolution was a big core one, the big debate between evolution and creationism. But I feel that there should be an ability to overlap the two without one destroying the other.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is that, well, we don't know the full length of evolution, and the Bible never actually says that anything too particular to disparage evolution beyond Adam and Eve.
Right, but because there's different denominations of religion, there are some that have certain specificities as to how things happen and how that can't be the case, etc., etc.
Evangelicals.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they will take everything so literally. Like it's, and that's one problem I have with evangelicals. It's not that I don't believe everything that the Bible says. It's that, a book isn't always literal. There are sometimes messages that are metaphorical or supposed to just be proverbs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just take everything extremely literally, you're going to miss kind of the point, and then you're going to start thinking that that anybody who says that we didn't come out of like some kind of weird garden of some sort with some kind of weird apple.
That we didn't sprout fully formed from the head of Zeus.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you literally have to believe that you'll have to stone somebody to death if you marry them and they're not a virgin. And yeah, but I think that's important. But what I did want to say though is that I think we should have a monoculture. I don't think there's anything wrong with subcultures as long as we feel that those subcultures are on the leash of we are an American first. You know, so there are plenty of times where if you were to say what's a good example? What's a good example? If you were to like go to an Irish bar and and let's say you had actual Irish ancestry, and and then all of a sudden Ireland and I don't know, maybe they kicked the president in the balls or something like that, something stupid, and now there's this huge mini war. You could always say, well, no, I'm just that's a subculture, but my loyalty is to America first. You know,
Right.
I guess what I could say is you could have collapsing cultures, collapsible, not collapsing, collapsible, something that you put away that will never be as important as another thing.
Right. You have the greater American culture and then the smaller cultures that make it up for each individual person. But in such an instance, then we get back to a situation like the ethno-states question. Because you have the greater cultures of the United States, which are the white culture and the black culture and the native culture, which is now the Hispanic culture.
Yeah.
So you have that big grouping, and you could subdivide that however you want. But you could easily break those down into all three are American, but all three are distinct and should be able to self-determine where they want to go.
I wouldn't break that too much down by race. That wouldn't be the kind of country I'd like it to rule. It's not that they wouldn't exist. I'm saying when it comes to how to make laws, I would prefer we throw race kind of slightly out of there and say if you are black, you need to be American first.
Well, the reason I break it down by race is once again because the the Africans who came here and became African Americans don't know what their roots are. Many Europeans who've been here for a long time don't know what their roots are. It's just the case that we are white and we are black. That's sort of what it's become.
Yeah. Well, I understand why that seems easier, but I prefer an America where we try to be something beyond the old world. I kind of don't like that a lot of people think of themselves as Europeans. It's not that I wouldn't that I'd have a problem with them saying I'm an ancestor of Europe, but it almost feels like they're kind of saying I
You
don't
mean a
believe
descendant of Europe? Descendant of Europe.
Right, yeah. But it almost seems like they're kind of starting to forget that. They're almost starting to see themselves more as German than they are actually American. And it almost seems like we're not able to make America into its own thing.
Right.
And that's the thing. America has created a lot of cool stuff. Jazz music. Say what you want about rap, but there are cool versions of it that aren't, about drugs. And we did create that. There's a lot of that music. Country music, and not just music, but even though we haven't quite achieved the greatness of architecture of the old world, we've created a lot of other stuff. We've scientific achievements no one else has ever seen.
No, I'd say the United States has developed a good style of architecture, which would be Art Deco. But I'm sure some people are going to say, "Well, that originated in France from this guy," or yada 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 yada. But it's like the Chrysler Building. It's like what we were really doing in the 20s and the 30s and up until the 50s, until we started doing the block buildings.
Oh yeah, the ones that look like the Soviet Union.
Oh yeah, the project buildings, the ones that are in the ghettos and all run down.
Yeah, those could make like great training centers because if like nobody wants to, if eventually people move out of the projects and are able to move into greater society, and those buildings become abandoned, they could do the same thing that they do in Russia. Like they completely renovate them and turn them into like military training facilities because there's no other use for them.
Yeah, it's a place to live. It's a very basic place to live. You could use it for military purposes or you could use it for low-income housing. But the damn thing is, low-income housing just attracts a lot of crime. So
yeah. Well, when you have low standards, that's why I say why America should have higher standards for immigration. It's because even if Mexico suddenly got its shit together and they're all happy, slappy, slappy, if or even better, if you just had people just from Japan come over and and it says somewhere on a piece of paper, well, if they're Japanese, there are no standards. You understand? Good. Okay. You're going to have a lot of bad people come in, probably more so because low standard groups have high amounts of bad people come in because bad people naturally cannot meet high standards and they need somewhere that they want to go. So they'll go to the places that are easy to take advantage of. So you're going to have a higher concentration of bad people from any country if you don't have a high standard for who you let in, because it's just where they would want to go.
Right.
Yeah. Well, anyway, man, I know we should definitely do a part 2.
Absolutely. In part 2, we basically got the general gist of like American identity out in this video.
Yeah.
I think for the next part, what do you want to talk about? Economics or the idea of fascism? I could like look more into it if you'd like.
Well, actually, when I asked you about economics, I was kind of asking like, what is the economics of fascism? Because it looked kind of like, from what I've heard, that it was corporatism.
No, that's where it gets complicated. That's where it's like, oh, that's not real communism. Some interpretations of fascism do consider corporatism their economic system. Other interpretations of fascism are nothing of the sort and are strongly opposed to corporatism, capitalism, and communism.
Wait. Then what else is there? Like,
you essentially have a system that's like it's like responsible capitalism that's balanced and slight redistribution for the poorest of society. But that's the way that fascism works makes it so essentially the whole nation is one big family that can agree on one thing, like 90% of the time. So the redistribution then is like, well, you're giving money to your family basically, and it's very little, it's very minimal.
Oh, that's a whole bunch of weird. We could definitely talk about at a different time. But I guess a good thing we could definitely talk about in part 2 would be, now that we defined American culture, and I guess we should say that we are a musical culture. We are definitely a culture that has created a huge amount of music, especially the modern types. You know, the old world had tons of opera and drums and stuff like that, but we have like, you know, all the modern, like, you know, like country
Guitars and such, modern electric guitars and all
yeah.
that. I'd say more so we're a scientific culture, just because we have so many inventors and builders, or maybe we're an engineering culture. Scientific or engineering is something I'd go for.
I think engineering, because scientists are usually more about, oh, what is, while engineers are, how do I accomplish?
Right.
Yeah, engineers, I know this because my dad was an engineer, and you know, he says we're application, scientists are discovery.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, but yeah, we should probably talk about, you know, what America might come to. Is there going to be a civil war? Is it just going to be another like, oh, there was a few people punching each other in this one protest and it got kind of bad and then it ended and we all went home.
No, that's where we are right now. That's where we're at right now. It can either decrease from there or escalate, and it seems unlikely to decrease. Who do you think could win in 2020 that would make, let's say, not even 80%, who would make 60% of the country happy? Not even that, 50% of the country happy.
Well, you know what? I'm hoping Trump wins again, based on all the other candidates I've seen. I don't like Andrew Yang, just because
Andrew Yang with his Yang gang, his Yang bangers.
I looked at some of his past. He doesn't look very strong. He looks like he would be a puppet to Kamala Harris.
I don't like Andrew Yang one bit. I can't endorse him rightfully. I've seen Richard Spencer come out and say that he's I know, I think it was a joke. I'm pretty sure it was a joke, but
Yay.
Yeah, Yang is not a good choice. People are looking at Yang just because they think he'll shake things up a little bit. He's like if Bernie and Trump had an Asian baby, but I really don't think so.
Well, that's the thing. They also, tons of people like James Alsop said that he wanted Yang because he'll go after the internet big tech companies. I agree that I'm sick of the censorship, but just because somebody says something, you really got to look at their record. What did they do beforehand? Do you have any? He could just be saying that and be like, I got all the people on the internet, and now I can do whatever I want.
Right. I think the breakup of tech companies is an important thing, but more so, more than anything, I feel that Trump is helping revive the American identity. And I think 4 more years of that could be good, but it could also be bad because he pacifies what is much of the very zealous right, the right that would say we need to have our own states that have their own rights. We are not going to tolerate any more of this liberalism. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like those are the real people who would say, you know what, I'm not taking it. I'm getting into politics right now.
Well, I'm
It would
going to be
make
running
a
for
big
state.
change.
Well, I'm going to be running for state senate in 2020. Believe it or not.
You are
Yeah.
state senate in 2020.
Yeah. I'm going to be primarying. I'm going to be primarying someone of my own party in Alberta, Darling.
What's your party?
Well, I'm going on the Republican ticket because nobody gives a shit about the libertarians in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, but it's mostly because I want to abolish alimony and a lot of what the family court system can do, because all they've done is become super gynocentric and
I think you could, if you want, you could also ride some of Yang's platforms without the sleazy background of it. Breaking up tech companies is pretty good.
Oh yeah, I would love that. I could only do so much in my state, but I would definitely enjoy that. And then get the Yang gang. Oh, God, it's so cringy. I don't even listen to rap, so whenever people say that, I know it's a rap thing. Well, I listen to some, a lot of old Eminem when he used to be hilarious.
Oh yeah, now he's awfully hot coffee pot.
Well, I do want to say this though before we go, because I know this is the longest goodbye I've ever had. But when it comes to what creates race, it really seems like the environment you grow up in causes race, and the environment that you grow up in probably affects IQ. So I'm thinking that that's why I think that when people say that race is important, I think it's more important to know your background. But I think we should still have the respect for the individual, not only rights, but abilities of every race, and realize that if you lived in Africa where there are no permanent rivers beyond ones that have a lot of waterfalls, which really restricts a lot of trade, if you grew up in a place where there's tons of animals that are huge that are running around killing you, and Africa is very flat in a lot of areas.
In all fairness, there were a lot of animals running around killing people in Europe, and they died.
They were killed down. We turned the wolf into a corgi. I mean, plus it's very flat too. So when it comes to rainfall, it's very, very dry, and even worse, a lot of groups that are not very friendly with each other do not have that mountain range to separate each other. You would probably have a hard time getting out of your primitive roots too, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah. Again, environment most certainly played a role in determining how the races would evolve, but that's going back far. And environment does still have an impact on development. But while nature and nurture is often thrown around, I think nature, which is again environment and your genetics, plays a much more substantial role in what you become than nurture. Nurture, of course, is I believe that if you have the willpower, you can really become, whatever you want.
Yeah.
But few people actually have that level of willpower. Most people just follow the path that nature has sort of laid out for them.
Yeah. Well, that's why I have started reading a bunch of books about self-improvement, and why I'm actually trying to become an entrepreneur before I run for state senate.
That's some solid stuff. That is really, that's great stuff, man.
I know. And personally, I think the biggest thing is this. When you really think about it, nature and nurture, they're kind of almost a false dichotomy. It's really more like nature is essentially nurture, but it's factors outside of your parents and people
Right.
who influence you. Because those are all
the nurture is just a part of nature because it's your parents who are you are the same as your nature.
Yeah, they're essentially they're very intense nature. They're the ones who raise you the most, so because everything else is still also molding who you are. But it's so open-ended, and there's so many factors that you can't really pin it down to, oh, this is your parents and this is everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But hey, man, part 2, let me know when you're available, okay?
All right, sure thing. Could you send me the link to the YouTube video in the chat here?
To you mean to the after we hang up the call?
Yeah, the podcast.
Yeah, sure. I can definitely do that. Oh, by the way, are all guns still restricted in New York?
No, not all guns are restricted in New York, but you can't travel with a gun. Basically, legally you should be able to, but if a cop pulls you over, the cop can arrest you.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so try not to get stabbed in New York.
It sucks, man. New York City is a terrible city. The rest of the state isn't so bad.
Yeah. Well, you should definitely come to like the Midwest. We're a lot better as long as you stay away from Milwaukee. It's like everywhere but Milwaukee and Chicago or any metropolitan area. It's actually kind of disturbing. You go into Milwaukee and you're like, did I just go into Mexico? It looks it looks like Sicario. No.
All right, dude. It was a great podcast. Thanks for having me on.
I'll send you the link, man.
All right. Later, dude. Take care.
All right. Bye.